This was it. This was the proof we needed to take them down. But I also knew that this was only the beginning. If the company found out that someone had leaked this information, it would mean war. The stakes had just been raised higher than ever before. I didn't waste any time. I immediately forwarded the documents to Gabe, along with a message. "We've got them. This is the proof. It's all here. Let's move on this before they can cover it up." Gabe's response came swiftly. "This is huge, John. You've got everything we need. Now we go public." I felt a wave of adrenaline wash over me. It was time to escalate. The company had been trying to silence me, to bury me in legal threats and smear campaigns, but this was different. We had the smoking gun. Now it was time to expose them to the world. Over the next 48 hours, Gabe worked fast. He helped me prepare a press release that outlined the company's fraudulent actions, making sure that it was airtight legally. We were careful not to release too much at once. Just enough to create a ripple, just enough to get the media's attention without tipping our hand completely. The moment we hit send, the storm began. The press picked up the story almost immediately. News outlets ran with the accusations, and soon enough, the company's shady practices were on display for the world to see. The stock dropped like a stone. Executives scrambled to issue denials, and the public outcry was swift. I watched it all unfold, my heart racing. This was the moment I had been fighting for. But as the days passed, the fallout was as intense as I had feared. The company wasn't just going to roll over. They came after me with everything they had. More legal threats, more smears, and even an attempt to discredit the whistleblower who had come forward. It felt like the world was closing in on me. The company's PR machine was working overtime, trying to paint me as a disgruntled employee who had fabricated the whole thing. They tried to twist my story, to make it about personal revenge rather than exposing their corruption. But despite the backlash, I didn't back down. I couldn't. The pressure mounted. There were days when I wanted to just walk away, when the stress felt like it might crush me. But every time I thought about Jason, about the surgery that was coming up, about Sarah standing by my side through all of this, I knew I couldn't quit. Not now. Not when the company's greed and deceit had hurt so many others. Gabe was with me every step of the way, guiding me through the legal mess, making sure we stayed ahead of the company's attempts to bury us. But even with all the evidence, even with the press on our side, I knew that this fight was far from over. The company had deep pockets, and they weren't going to let this go without a fight. They would drag this out, wear me down, and do everything in their power to make me regret ever speaking out. But I couldn't let them win. Not now. Not after everything I had sacrificed. And every time I thought about how close I was to taking them down, to finally getting justice, not just for me, but for everyone they had trampled on, I knew I couldn't stop. The storm had arrived, and I was ready for the fight of my life. The weight of the fight was starting to show. In the beginning, I had been driven by purpose, by the belief that I was doing the right thing, and that justice was on my side. But the longer this dragged on, the more I felt the toll it was taking on me. The press coverage had grown even more intense. Some days the headlines were relentless. "Whistleblower reveals corruption at major corporation," they read. The story spread like wildfire, reaching news outlets across the country. It was all I could think about, and the more I saw it, the more it consumed me. I tried to focus on the positives. We had proof. The media was on our side, and there were cracks forming in the company's empire. But the reality of it was starting to sink in. I was in the middle of a war. The company's response was predictable, and it was brutal. They threw everything at me. More legal threats, more attempts to discredit me. Their lawyers were relentless, pulling every trick in the book to try to wear me down. They tried to drag out the process, filing motions that delayed everything, making me relive the worst moments over and over again in the media. And they didn't stop with me. They went after anyone who had even remotely supported me. The anonymous whistleblower who had helped me with the documents, my lawyer, even my friends and colleagues who had been approached by reporters for statements. Began to notice the psychological toll this was having on me. I wasn't sleeping. I couldn't focus. Every time my phone rang, my heart would race, and every email felt like an attack. The weight of the legal battle was draining me, and I found Myself becoming more distant from Sarah. We didn't talk as much as we used to. She was holding everything together on the surface, but I could see the strain in her eyes. She wasn't just worried about Jason's surgery anymore. She was worried about me. About us. I couldn't help but feel guilty. She had been through so much with me already, and now this. The fight had consumed every part of my life, and I was losing sight of everything I had worked so hard to build. My family, my relationship with her, and even the kind of man I used to be before all of this. I had spent my entire life trying to be the guy who could solve everyone's problems, the one who could protect my family, who could always make things right. But now I felt like I was the one causing the problem. I tried to keep up appearances, to stay strong, but it was becoming harder and harder to do. The legal pressure was suffocating, and every email, every message from Gabe, every document I had to review felt like a new weight on my shoulders. The physical toll was catching up. With me, too. I hadn't been sleeping, and the fatigue was starting to affect my health. There were mornings when I felt like I couldn't get out of bed, when the thought of facing another day felt like a mountain too steep to climb. One night, after a particularly brutal day of legal filings and media attacks, I found myself sitting. The living room in the dark. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. The pressure was becoming unbearable. I kept replaying everything in my mind. What had started as a noble cause had spiraled into something far bigger than I had ever expected. I heard footsteps behind me, and then Sarah's voice, soft and cautious. "John, are you okay?" I didn't turn around at first. The truth was I wasn't okay, but I couldn't bring myself to admit it. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice betrayed me. It sounded hollow, even to my own ears. Sarah didn't buy it. "You're not fine. I can see it, John. You're breaking down, and I can't watch you do this to yourself anymore. I don't want you to lose yourself in this fight. You've already given so much. I'm scared you're going to lose everything, yourself, us, if this keeps going." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. I wasn't just losing my job, my career. I was losing the people who mattered the most to me. I felt the weight of it in my chest, a suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. "I don't know what to do anymore, Sarah," I whispered, my voice breaking. "This has become bigger than I ever imagined, and it's not just about the company anymore. It's about me. It's about what I've become. I'm not the man I used to be. I'm not the husband you married." Sarah knelt beside me, taking my hand in hers. Her touch was warm, comforting, but the worry in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She was scared. We both were. "You're still the man I married, John," she said gently. "You're just overwhelmed right now. This isn't just about fighting a company. It's about you taking back control of your life. You don't have to do this alone. You don't have to be the only one carrying the weight. We're a team. We'll face this together." Her words should have been a comfort, but instead they just made me feel like I had failed her. I had promised to be strong for her, for Jason, but now I was the one falling apart. I closed my eyes, trying to hold myself together. The truth was I didn't know how much more I could take. The weight of everything was starting to crush me, but I couldn't back down now. "I don't know if I can win this," I said quietly. "I don't know if I'm strong enough anymore." Sarah squeezed my hand, her voice full of conviction. "You don't have to win it alone. We'll get through this. You're not alone, John. Not now, not ever." I felt a rush of emotion flood through me, and for the first time in weeks I allowed myself to lean into her. I had been so focused on the fight that I'd forgotten the one thing that truly mattered: my family. The fight wasn't just for me. It was for them too. "I'm scared, Sarah," I admitted, my voice shaky. "But I'll keep fighting. I'll fight for you, for Jason, for us, no matter what happens." "I know you will," she said softly. "But promise me one thing, John. Don't lose yourself in this. Promise me you'll come back to us when it's over." "I promise," I whispered. And in that moment, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everything I had left, the family, the people who had stood by me through this entire mess. No matter how hard it got, I wouldn't let it destroy the most important things in my life. I would finish this fight, and I would do whatever it took to come out of it intact. Just as I was beginning to find some strength to push through the psychological toll, the unexpected happened. The company wasn't just fighting back legally. They were pulling strings in the background in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had been prepared for a tough legal battle, for more smear campaigns and threats. But I wasn't prepared for this. It came in the form of a letter, delivered by courier to my doorstep on a Wednesday afternoon. I wasn't home at the time, but Sarah was. When I came back, she was sitting at the kitchen table, the letter in her hands, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. "John," she said, her voice trembling as she handed me the letter. "I don't know what to make of this, but it's from the company." I took the letter, and as soon as I read the first few lines, I felt the ground shift beneath me. It wasn't a legal challenge or a cease and desist. This was something far worse. They had initiated a public defamation campaign, claiming that I had falsified evidence, manipulated documents, and was attempting to extort the company for financial gain. The letter included a formal demand for an immediate public retraction of my claims, and it threatened to sue me for slander, damages, and the financial losses incurred as a result of my baseless allegations. "How could they do this?" Sarah whispered. "They're saying you're lying. They're calling you a fraud." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just a legal tactic anymore. It was personal. The company wasn't just defending itself. They were coming after my character, trying to paint me as a criminal. They were trying to destroy my credibility, to make it look like I was the villain in this story. I could feel the panic rising inside of me. How was I supposed to fight this? They had the money, the influence, and now they were using it to systematically tear me apart. What was to stop them from turning the public tide against me? What was to stop them from destroying everything I had left? I looked at Sarah and I could see the fear in her eyes. She had always been my rock, the one person I could rely on when the world felt like it was falling apart. But even she was starting to crumble under the pressure. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice soft, defeated. I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I was more lost than ever. I had given everything to this fight, and now it felt like I was staring at a dead end. The legal battle was no longer just about winning. It was about surviving. How much more could we take? How long could I keep putting my family through this? "We have to respond," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We can't just let them smear me like this. We have to fight back." But even as I said it, I could feel the weight of doubt creeping in again. This wasn't just about getting my job back anymore. It wasn't just about the fight to expose their wrongdoing. This was about my reputation, my life. The company had taken it to a level I hadn't expected. They were pulling out all the stops. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The media had been on my side up until now, but how long would that last? How much damage would this new campaign cause? Could I trust the evidence I had? What if they had found a way to undermine it all, to make it look like I was the one in the wrong? My thoughts were spiraling, each one darker than the last. I knew I had to get a grip, to focus. But the weight of everything, the legal battles, the media attacks, the financial strain, and the toll it was taking on my family, was suffocating. The next morning I called Gabe, my lawyer, hoping he had a solution. But when I explained the situation, I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "This is a setback, John," he said after a long pause. "They've gone on the offensive, and it's going to get much uglier from here. I can help you fight this, but you need to understand that we're in uncharted territory now. The company has the resources to destroy you, and they know how to play dirty. If they can discredit you in the public eye, it could have a lasting impact on your case." I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear that the company could be stronger than me. But Gabe was right. I couldn't deny it. I paced the room, my mind trying to make sense of what to do next. I had already given up so much. I had already lost my job, my sense of stability, and the life I thought I would have. But I had never considered what would happen if they came after me like this. They were no longer just attacking my career. They were attacking my identity, my integrity. Gabe gave me advice, but even as he laid out our options, I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of dread that was weighing me down. We could file countersuits, we could keep pushing forward, but the battle was going to be long, expensive, and mentally exhausting. The company wasn't just playing to win, they were playing to break me. I sat down with Sarah later that day. She had been quiet, trying to digest everything that had happened, but I could see the toll this was taking on her too. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Sarah," I admitted, the vulnerability in my voice cutting through the silence. "They're coming for everything. I've been fighting for so long, but I feel like I'm losing more than I can ever gain." She sat beside me, her hand on mine. "John, I know this is harder than we thought. I know you're hurting, but you can't give up. You're fighting for something bigger than yourself, bigger than us. You can't let them win, not like this." I looked at her, and in her eyes I saw something that reignited the flame within me. She was right. I couldn't give up. Not now. Not after everything we had been through. I stood up, took a deep breath, and made a decision. I wasn't going to back down. This fight was far from over. It was going to be brutal, and it was going to test every part of me. But if I had to destroy myself to expose them, then that's what I would do. The company wasn't going to win this, not without a fight, and I wasn't going down without giving them hell. The next few days were a blur of activity. But now it wasn't just about responding to the company's attacks. It was about getting ahead of them, using the one thing they hadn't seen coming. I needed a weapon, something they couldn't ignore, something they couldn't twist or undermine. And as I sat in my office sifting through files and documents, I realized what I needed was already in my hands. The very thing that had started this whole journey. The offer letter. It was more than just a contract. It was proof that they had promised me stability, security, and respect. But they had broken that promise. And now I was going to use that broken promise against them. I hadn't fully understood its potential until now. The offer letter wasn't just a document outlining my employment terms. It was evidence of their failure to follow through. Evidence that could expose how the company had failed its promises. I had always thought of it as something I could fall back on if the job ever got too hard, or if the company started cutting corners. But I had never considered that it could be my key to dismantling their entire defense. I began working with Gabe to draft a new legal strategy, one that wasn't just about defending myself, but about attacking the heart of the company's deception. Gabe believed we had a legitimate claim for breach of contract. Not only had they fired me without cause, but they had done so in a way that was so poorly handled. They had violated the very terms they had agreed to when they offered me the position. It wasn't just about being fired. It was about the lack of due process. They hadn't even followed their own protocols for termination. And the offer letter, in its own way, was a weapon against that. The more we dug into it, the clearer it became. The company had misrepresented the conditions surrounding the layoffs and had failed to provide proper severance or benefits as outlined in their own employee manual. In fact, they had pushed employees like me to sign agreements that waived rights that should have been protected under the law. "We can turn this offer letter into a legal weapon," Gabe said one afternoon after I had gone over the letter for what felt like the 100th time. "It's not just about what's in it, it's about what's missing, and what they did to you. We've got leverage here, and we'll use..." But with that leverage came a price. The company wasn't going to take this sitting down. I knew they would escalate, and it would mean even more pressure, more attempts to discredit me, more legal maneuvering to bury the case. But if I had any hope of surviving this, it was going to be through the truth. And truth, as I had learned over the past few months, was something that couldn't be easily erased. I wasn't just fighting for a paycheck anymore. I wasn't fighting for revenge. I was fighting for something more, something bigger. I was fighting to show that a company like this couldn't trample on people's lives without consequences. It wasn't just about me. It was about every person they had discarded without a second thought. And I wasn't alone in this fight. That fact gave me strength when it felt like I had nothing left. Sarah had been my rock, and now I saw how her support had transformed me. She wasn't just standing by my side. She was fighting with me. Together, we were more than just the sum of our fears. Gabe helped me prepare the next round of legal responses. This time it was different. Instead of reacting to their attacks, we were taking the fight to them. I spent the next few days going through the motions, filing legal documents, preparing for the inevitable court dates. But in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was personal. This was about me taking back control. As I was leaving the office one night, my phone buzzed. It was an email, and the subject line caught my attention. Urgent, document leak. I opened it immediately and my stomach twisted as I read the message. The anonymous whistleblower I had been in contact with had sent more documents. These weren't just emails or memos. These were financial records that showed the company's executives had been systematically inflating the company's worth in order to push for a higher sale price. And buried within the pages was something that made my blood run cold. An email exchange between the top executives where they openly discussed cutting employees to increase their bonuses before the sale. They had made decisions, knowing they would fire people without cause, using the company as a pawn in their game of profit. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This was everything I needed. Not just proof that they were manipulating the system, it was proof of malicious intent. They hadn't just fired me as a cost-saving measure. They had been actively sabotaging employees, orchestrating layoffs to benefit themselves at the expense of the workers. This was the smoking gun. I immediately forwarded the documents to Gabe, along with a note. This changes everything. We have them. We go public with this. Gabe responded quickly. This is explosive. We're not just fighting for wrongful termination anymore. We're fighting to expose corporate greed and corruption on a massive scale. Prepare for everything to change. And just like that, everything changed. The company's attempt to smear me now felt like small potatoes compared to what we were about to reveal. We had the evidence that could bring down the entire operation. But that didn't mean the fight was over. In fact, it was just beginning. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. I knew it would only escalate from here. But there was no turning back now. The truth was out. And I was ready to make them pay for everything they had taken. Everything we had worked toward was culminating in one moment. The documents from the whistleblower had shaken the company to its core, and the truth was finally out there. Now, the media was on fire. The public demanded answers. But the company wasn't going down without a fight. The stakes had risen, and the battle had gone from legal to all-out war. The night before the big hearing, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of legal documents, emails, and evidence. My hands trembled as I read through the final details one last time. Gabe had spent the last several hours reviewing the new evidence, and he was ready to push forward. Tomorrow, we would officially lay bare the corruption that had been festering inside the company. But the weight of it all was overwhelming. I can't believe we're really doing this, Sarah said softly from across the room. She was sitting on the couch, her eyes glued to the TV. But I could tell her mind wasn't on the news. It was on me, on the storm we were about to weather. I knew she had been worried for weeks, maybe even more than I realized. Tomorrow could change everything. Are you ready for this? I looked up at her, trying to keep my composure, but I could feel the weight of her gaze, her concern for me, for our future, for everything we had built together. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what would happen tomorrow. But I knew one thing. I had to do this no matter what. I don't think anyone is ever truly ready for something like this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But we're already in it. There's no turning back now. The hearing. The next day was the culmination of everything. The months of legal wrangling, the smear campaigns, the quiet moments of doubt. The moment the doors to the courtroom opened, I felt a surge of nervous energy flood my chest. The walls of the courtroom seemed to close in on me, but I knew I had to keep my focus. I wasn't there to win for myself. I was there for everyone who had been discarded and mistreated by a company that thought it could get away with anything. Gabe stood beside me, his usual calm demeanor unwavering as he prepared our case. The company's legal team was there, a sea of sharp suits and cold expressions, led by the same high-powered attorneys who had done everything in their power to silence me. They had already started their strategy of discrediting me, calling my actions a desperate attempt to salvage my career. They claimed I was motivated by personal grievances, that the documents I had presented were selectively edited, manipulated, for my own gain, but this time they were wrong. They couldn't twist the truth, not with the overwhelming evidence we had. The whistleblower's documents, those financial reports, the emails, the carefully structured plan to sabotage employees, were irrefutable. It was all there, laid out in black and white. As the hearing began, I sat there with a knot in my stomach, watching the opposing legal team present their case. They were good, no doubt about it, but there was a certain desperation in their eyes, a flicker of uncertainty that I hadn't seen before. The moment the judge called me to the stand, I felt the tension rise in the air. My heart pounded in my chest. I took a deep breath and stood up, walking toward the witness stand. The moment I stepped into the chair, I knew it was no longer just a legal battle, it was personal. This was the moment that could make or break everything. The opposing lawyer began their cross-examination with their usual theatrics, trying to paint me as an unreliable witness. They used my firing against me, questioning my motives and trying to bring up my past mistakes in the company. But with each question I answered calmly, knowing that the truth was on my side. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Gabe stood up and asked the judge for permission to submit the whistleblower's documents into evidence. The courtroom was silent as the judge nodded, and the documents were placed in front of everyone, one by one. The room seemed to hold its breath as the lawyers on the other side scrolled through the files. Their expressions slowly shifted from confidence to shock, and I could see them whispering to each other, trying to come up with a response. But it was too late. The evidence spoke for itself. The company's executives had systematically manipulated financial records, lying to investors, misrepresenting their practices to employees, and deliberately cutting costs at the expense of people like me. The emails detailing how they planned to fire employees to increase their bonuses were right there, plain as day. There was no escaping it. The company had been playing a dangerous game, and they had underestimated the people they thought they could control. As the judge began to question the company's legal team, I felt a shift in the room. The company was no longer in control. The lies had been exposed. The following hours dragged by as the evidence was meticulously reviewed. Gabe made sure to highlight every discrepancy, every lie, and every failure in the company's defense. With each new revelation, I could feel a sense of vindication building inside me. They had underestimated us. They thought they could silence me. But now the truth was out, and no matter what happened from here on out, they couldn't take that back. As the day came to a close, the judge adjourned, promising a verdict the following morning. I left the courtroom with a sense of exhaustion, my body drained from the emotional toll. But there was also a quiet confidence that I hadn't had before. The company was fighting for its life, but I had already won. Not just for me, but for every employee they had exploited. Every person they had discarded. The truth had been exposed, and no amount of money or power could take that away. I returned home to Sarah, who was waiting for me. She was sitting in the living room, looking, tired but hopeful. When she saw me walk through the door, her face softened. Without saying a word, I sat down beside her and she wrapped her arms around me. "You did it," she whispered. "I didn't do it alone," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We did it." We sat there for a long time, holding each other, knowing that the fight wasn't over yet. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The truth had come out, and no matter what happened in the days to come, I knew I had done everything I could. And that, in itself, was a victory. Tomorrow, we would hear the verdict. But tonight, I could finally breathe. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of the world lifting from my shoulders. The fight had been long, but the end was finally in sight. The next morning, the courtroom was filled with tension as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. I sat with Gabe at the front trying to keep my composure, but the anxiety was overwhelming. I kept glancing at Sarah, sitting behind me, her eyes fixed on the front of the room, full of hope and apprehension. The company's legal team sat across. From us, their faces unreadable, but I could tell they were bracing for the worst. The judge entered and the room fell silent. The weight of the moment pressed down on me, and I felt the blood rushing to my ears, drowning out everything around me. This was it, the culmination of everything we had worked for, everything I had sacrificed. The judge cleared his throat, and when he spoke, it was in a calm, measured tone. After reviewing all the evidence presented, and considering the severity of the violations committed by the defendant, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff, John Carpenter, on all counts of wrongful termination, breach of contract, and malicious corporate misconduct. My heart leapt into my throat. It felt like the room had gone still, like time itself had stopped. The company's actions were not only unlawful, but were undertaken with a disregard for the rights and well-being of their employees. The plaintiff will be awarded compensation for damages, as well as the costs of legal fees, and an official, public apology will be issued by the defendant. Furthermore, an investigation will be initiated into the company's financial practices. The verdict echoed in my head, each word landing like a punch in the chest. I could feel Gabe's hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. My eyes flickered toward Sarah, and I saw the relief in her face. Her shoulders, once tense, now slumping in quiet relief. I hadn't even realized how much I was holding my breath until that moment. The company's legal team was stone-faced, their eyes down, but there was nothing they could do. The truth had won. It was finally over. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the decision settled in. I was aware of every pair of eyes on me, but it didn't matter. They couldn't take this from me. The fight wasn't just about a paycheck or a company that had tossed me aside. It was about exposing a system that had been built to exploit people for profit. And in the end, it was the truth that had carried us through. As we left the courtroom, Gabe turned to me with a rare smile. "You did it, John. You brought them to their knees." "I couldn't have done it without you," I replied, feeling the exhaustion settle in my bones. The relief was coming in waves, but it wasn't over. There was still the matter of the financial settlement and the media attention we would have to navigate. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. The battle had been long and the scars would remain, but I had won. Later that evening, I sat with Sarah at home, the two of us in the quiet of our living room. It felt like we had just come through a storm, and now the world was still. It was hard to believe it was over. Hard to believe that the nightmare of the past few months was finally behind us. "You did it, John," Sarah said again, her voice soft. "You fought for us, for everything we've worked for." I took her hand, squeezing it tightly. "We fought for everything, Sarah. It wasn't just me. It was all of us. I couldn't have done this without you, without your support." She smiled, leaning in to kiss me on the cheek. "We've been through so much, but I knew you'd get us through this. You didn't give up. You didn't back down. That's what matters." I smiled back at her, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude and relief. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. I thought about Jason's upcoming surgery. I thought about the future we had ahead of us, the lessons we had learned, and the sacrifices we had made. This fight had cost us more than I could have imagined, but it had also made us stronger. We had been tested, and we had come out the other side intact. But more than anything, I thought about the people who had come before me, the ones who had been silenced, the ones who hadn't had the voice or the power to fight back. This wasn't just a win for me. It was a win for anyone who had ever been taken advantage of, overlooked, or discarded in the name of profit. As I looked at Sarah, I knew this was a new beginning. We had fought the system, we had won, and we had reclaimed our lives. The fight wasn't over. It would never be truly over. But this chapter, this battle, was finished, and for the first time in months, I could finally breathe. The phone rang, breaking the silence between us. I picked it up, and as soon as I saw the caller ID, I knew it was Gabe. "John, I've got some good news," Gabe said on the other end, his voice filled with excitement. "The company is going to comply with the court's decision. They're paying the settlement, and they're going to issue the apology. This is it. You've done it." I could hardly believe it. The victory was real. The company was going to pay. They were going to apologize. This wasn't just a legal win. It was a moral one. "Thank you, Gabe," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You were with me every step of the way. I couldn't have done this without you." "We made a hell of a team," he replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Now, take care of yourself. Enjoy the peace you've earned." I hung up the phone, feeling like a weight had been lifted from my chest. I turned to Sarah, my eyes filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion. "It's over," I said, my voice a whisper. She nodded, her smile warm. "It's over." And as we sat together in the quiet of our home, I knew this was the beginning of a new chapter. The journey had been long, painful, and fraught with uncertainty, but we had made it through. We had fought for each other, for the truth, and for a better future. And in that moment I realized the real victory wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in the strength we had found, the love we had held on to, and the resilience that had carried us through. In the weeks that followed, the whirlwind of media coverage began to settle. The company had complied with the court's decision, publicly acknowledging its misconduct and issuing the apology the judge had ordered. It was a hollow gesture, but it felt like justice nonetheless. The financial settlement was substantial, and though it didn't erase the pain or the sacrifices, it provided a sense of security we hadn't had in months. But the battle was not just legal, it was emotional. Sarah and I took time to process everything that had happened. There were days when I would sit in silence thinking about the fight we had gone through, about the toll it had taken on us. But I had learned something important over the past few months. We were stronger than I had ever realized. My son Jason's surgery came and went, and while there were complications, the doctors were optimistic about his recovery. That was the moment I realized just how important it was to fight for the people who truly mattered. We hadn't just fought to right a wrong in the corporate world. We had fought for each other, for Jason's future, for the stability of our family. The pressure of the legal battle had kept us busy. But now, it was time to heal. Time to rediscover the peace we had almost lost. Sarah and I started to reconnect slowly, in the ways that mattered the most. We spent evenings walking through the park, talking about things other than the lawsuit, other than the company. We found a rhythm again, one that wasn't defined by fear and constant tension. The financial settlement from the case allowed us to breathe, but it wasn't just about the money. It was the closure, the feeling that we had fought back against, a system that thought it could crush us and had failed. That feeling of victory was priceless. In the midst of all the chaos, something unexpected happened. One of the former colleagues I had worked with at the company reached out to me. He had been one of the ones who had been laid off under the same circumstances, and he had seen everything unfold. He told me he was leaving the corporate world and wanted to start something new, something with purpose. He invited me to join him in creating a consultancy focused on corporate transparency, helping employees who had been mistreated by large corporations like the one I had fought. At first, I was hesitant. I wasn't sure I was ready to dive back into a world that had taken so much from me. But then, I thought about everything that had happened. The fight for justice, the people who had stood by me, and the knowledge that the system needed to change. Maybe this was the opportunity to make a real difference, to use what I had learned for something meaningful. I talked it over with Sarah, and though she had her reservations, she was supportive. We both knew that this new venture wasn't just about making money, it was about making sure that no one else had to go through what I had. We began working on the business plan, and slowly, the idea started to take shape. We weren't just going to be another consulting firm. We were going to be a voice for the people who had been silenced, for those who had been discarded and forgotten by the corporate world. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was going to be worth it. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. There would be challenges, new obstacles, and old scars to work through. But this time, I wasn't walking alone. I had Sarah by my side, and together, we were building something that felt right, something that aligned with everything we had fought for. I also thought about the people who had helped me along the way. Jack, who had been a constant source of support, and Gabe, who had been my lifeline throughout the legal process. I made a vow to myself that I would never forget the people who had stood with me when everything seemed impossible. They had taught me what it meant to truly fight for what was right, and I would carry those lessons forward. As the months passed, our consultancy began to grow. We took on clients, small at first, but soon word spread. More and more companies reached out to us, looking for guidance on how to treat their employees with integrity. We didn't just advise them on policy changes. We helped them create cultures of accountability, where employees could thrive without fear of exploitation. We were building something real, something lasting. But perhaps the greatest change was the way I saw myself. The man who had walked into that courtroom, filled with doubt and fear, was no longer the same person. I had learned what it meant to stand firm in the face of overwhelming odds. I had learned that the truth was a powerful thing, even when it felt like no one was listening. And most importantly, I had learned that the fight for justice wasn't just a battle. It was a lifelong commitment. The journey hadn't been easy, and it had cost us more than we ever could have imagined. But looking back, I realized it had shaped me into the person I was meant to become. One evening, as I sat in my office, going over some paperwork for a new client, I looked up and saw Sarah standing in the doorway. She smiled, her eyes soft and full of love. "How's everything going?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Good," I said, my voice steady. "Better than I ever imagined." She walked over and sat beside me, her hand resting gently on mine. "You've come a long way, John. We've come a long way." I nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. "Yeah, we have." In that moment, I knew that no matter what came next, I was ready, because I wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. I was living it, and no one, no company, no person would ever take that away from me again. Time passed, and with each day, the shadows of the past seemed to shrink a little more. The consultancy Sarah and I had started began to take off in ways we hadn't anticipated. Clients came in steadily, and we were able to expand our team. But it wasn't just about the business growth. It was about the people we were helping. I had become accustomed to the idea that my fight had been about exposing the wrongs of one company, but I slowly realized it was more than that. Our work was now about helping organizations foster environments where integrity was at the core of their business. As much as I relished the success of the business, it wasn't without its challenges. Every new project brought its own set of problems, and while the consultancy was gaining traction, I still carried the weight of everything that had come before. The scars from the battle with my former employer would always be with me. The sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the moments of doubt when I wasn't sure if I could go on. But as we got more clients who genuinely cared about ethical leadership, I began to see a future where this pain had a purpose. One afternoon, I was meeting with a potential client, a company that had been struggling with its own internal issues. They were looking to overhaul their corporate culture, to make real changes, and they reached out to us for help. The CEO, a woman in her late 40s, sat across from me, her demeanor professional but weary. She had seen what corporate greed could do to employees, and she was determined to turn her company around. "I've been where you've been," she said after we discussed the scope of the project. "I've been in that fight. I know what feels like to be at the mercy of a system that doesn't care about people. But I want to build something different here. I want to make sure no one else has to go through what we've gone through." Her words hit me hard. She didn't know my story, didn't know what I had been through. But I could hear the pain in her voice, the loss, the frustration. I could hear the desire for redemption. It was the same desire that had driven me to stand up against my former employer, the same desire that had kept me going when everything seemed hopeless. "You're not alone in this," I said to her, a deep sense of connection forming between us. "I've walked that path, and I know how hard it is to change the culture of an organization. But I also know how powerful it is when you're doing the right thing." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "That's what I want for my company. I want us to be a place where people can work with dignity, where they don't have to be afraid of losing their jobs just to keep the bottom line healthy. I want to build a culture of respect, of accountability, and I think you can help us get there." Something in me stirred. I was no longer just the man who had fought to expose corporate corruption. I was now the person who could guide others in creating a better future. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this was the true road to redemption, not just for me, but for the people I could help, for the companies that were still out there, struggling to find a way to do things right. Over the next few months, our consultancy began to grow exponentially. Word of mouth spread quickly. More businesses came to us, and our work started making a real difference. I realized we weren't just consultants, we were agents of change. We weren't here just to fix problems. We were here to help companies rediscover their humanity, their purpose. We were giving employees the voice they deserved. We were helping businesses thrive by doing what was right, not just what was easy. But the success of the consultancy didn't mean the past was forgotten. I still had moments when I thought about the company I had fought, the battle, the lies, the sacrifices. There were days when I would lie awake wondering if I could have done things differently, wondering if I had truly won. One night, as I sat in the living room with Sarah, I finally voiced what had been on my mind. "Do you ever think about what happened with the company? About the fight?" I asked, my voice quiet. She looked at me, her eyes soft. "I think about it sometimes, but not in the way you do. I think about how far we've come, how much we've built, what we've created. I think about how proud I am of you. You didn't just survive the fight, John. You came out of it stronger, and you've helped so many others along the way." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I had spent so much time obsessing over the fight itself, but in the end, it wasn't just about winning. It was about the person I had become after it, the person who could now lead others toward a better way of doing business, of treating people with the respect they deserved. I still have moments where I wonder if I did enough, I admitted, if the fight was worth it. There were times when I thought it was all too much, like I was drowning in the weight of it. But hearing you say that, it helps me see it differently. Sarah smiled, her hand resting on mine. "You've always done more than enough, John. You just had to go through it to find the right path. And now, you're helping others find that same path." I sat there in silence for a while, letting her words sink in. The battle had been grueling, and it had cost us more than I could ever express. But it had shaped me. It had pushed me to a place where I could help others, where I could stand on the other side of pain and give people the tools they needed to fight for what was right, just as I had. As we watched the sunset from our porch, I thought about the future, about the businesses we would help, the lives we would change, and the legacy we would leave behind. The fight for justice wasn't over, but now it wasn't just about one man against a corporation. It was about empowering people to take a stand for what was right. It was about creating a world where no one had to lose themselves to a system that didn't care. And as Sarah and I sat there side by side, I realized that the true victory wasn't in the courtroom, or in the settlement, or in the company's public apology. The true victory was in the new beginning we had created, together. As the months passed, the consultancy continued to thrive, but with success came new challenges. Our team had grown, and we were taking on larger clients, bigger companies with their own set of complicated issues. The work was rewarding, but it was never easy. Every company we helped had its own entrenched culture, and breaking through years, sometimes decades, of bad practices required patience, persistence, and a deep commitment to the long-term work of transformation. Sarah and I spent countless hours in meetings, working late into the night, trying to balance our growing business with the time we needed to be present with each other, and with Jason, who was recovering steadily from his surgery. The financial burden had been lifted, but the emotional toll of what we had been through still lingered in small ways. We both had our moments of doubt, when the pressure felt like too much. But we kept reminding each other that we weren't just fighting for ourselves anymore. We were fighting for the kind of world we wanted our son to grow up in, a world where the future of work wasn't defined by exploitation and greed, but by fairness and respect. One afternoon I found myself sitting alone in the office, poring over contracts and notes from the latest client. The weight of everything we were trying to build pressed heavily on me. There was so much to do, so many lives we could change, but there were also so many obstacles, small moments of resistance, clients who didn't quite get it, and corporate leaders who weren't ready to face the truth of their own cultures. Stared out the window, lost in thought, when my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Gabe, my lawyer, and the message had a certain urgency to it. "John, you need to see this. Something's happening with the company you sued. They're coming for you again. Be prepared." My heart sank. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I had been expecting this, but a part of me had hoped that the chapter with the old company was closed. After everything that had happened, I thought I was done. We were done. I quickly called Gabe. "John," he said, his voice tinged with the same urgency as his text. "It looks like the company has hired a new legal team. They're coming after you, but this time, it's not just a defamation campaign. They're going after the settlement you received. They're claiming that you didn't uphold your part of the agreement, and are threatening to reverse the decision." My mind raced. "What do you mean they're going after the settlement?" "We have the court's ruling. This was all resolved." "I know," Gabe replied. But they've found a loophole. They're arguing that you breached confidentiality clauses regarding the details of the settlement. They're using the public apology as a point of leverage and saying you violated it by talking about the terms of the settlement in your interviews. They're claiming you've undermined the whole agreement. I felt like I was falling. It was as if the ground had been ripped out from under me, and I was being thrown back into the storm of everything I had fought so hard to overcome. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It felt like the company was retaliating, still trying to make me pay for exposing them, for forcing them to face the truth. Is this even possible? I asked, my voice tight with frustration. It's possible, yes, Gabe said, but it's not a guarantee they'll win. We can fight this, but you'll have to be prepared. This is going to get ugly. They're desperate. I stood up, pacing the room as the weight of it all set in. After everything I had sacrificed, after exposing their lies, after winning justice for myself and the others, they were coming after me again. It felt like the battle was never going to end. How could they still have this power over me? But then I thought about what we had built, the consultancy, the clients we had helped, the changes we were making in the world. I thought about Sarah and Jason, about everything I had fought for. I couldn't let them take this from me. I couldn't let them define who I was or what I had done. I'm not backing down, I said, my voice steady, my resolve returning. We'll fight. We've fought before and we'll fight again. Gabe's voice softened, but it was still firm. I knew you'd say that. We'll start preparing, but this time we need to make sure we're ready for anything. They're not playing by the same rules anymore, and neither can we. As the conversation ended, I sat back down at my desk trying to make sense of the steps. The fight with the company was far from over. It had only evolved into something more complicated, more vicious. But I wasn't the same person who had walked into that courtroom all those months ago. I had learned too much, had become too strong to let them push me around again. The truth was, I was ready for this. I was no longer fighting out of fear or desperation. I was fighting for the future we were creating. And this time, we were going to do it differently. We weren't just going to fight to expose them. We were going to fight to change the rules of the game. That night, as I sat with Sarah and Jason, I realized that no matter what happened next, we had already won. We had built something good, something real. We were creating a legacy of integrity, and no one could take that away from us. The company's retaliation was just another obstacle, another hurdle to overcome. And this time, we were ready. Sarah looked at me with concern as I walked into the living room, her eyes searching mine. John, what's going on? They're coming after us again, I said, sitting down beside her. But we'll handle it. We're stronger now, and we're not backing down. She took my hand, and for the first time in days, I felt the weight of the world lift just a little. We had come so far, and now, no matter what happened, I knew we would keep moving forward. Together. This fight was far from over, but I wasn't afraid anymore. The next few weeks felt like a battle of attrition. The company's legal team, armed with a new set of tactics and their unyielding resources, hit us from all angles. They filed motion after motion, trying to discredit me, to turn the public tide back in their favor. They were relentless, using every tool they had to exhaust us, to break our spirits. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't alone in this fight. I had Sarah, I had our team, and most importantly, I had the truth on my side. We knew their strategy now. They were trying to claim that the settlement's public nature had been violated by me talking to the press about the terms of the agreement, despite the fact that I had never shared the confidential details of the settlement itself, only the fact that they had failed to live up to their obligations. They were trying to twist my words, making it seem like I was breaching the very agreement I had fought for. But we had done nothing wrong. Every interview I gave, every speech I made, was rooted in truth. Gabe and I spent long hours working on our defense. The pressure was starting to get to me. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a sense of dread. Every time an email popped up, it felt like another strike against everything we had built. But there was no going back now. This wasn't just a fight for my reputation. This was a fight for the integrity of everything we had stood for. The work we were doing to change corporate culture, the future we were building with our consultancy, and the hope we had instilled in other employees who had been wronged. 1. Morning, as we prepared for another court appearance, I felt a rare moment of clarity. I was sitting at my desk looking over a document when I heard a soft knock on the door. Sarah stepped in, her expression serious but warm. "John, I know this has been hard on you," she said, walking over to me. "But I need you to remember something. You're doing this for more than just us. You're doing it for all the people who don't have a voice, for the ones who don't know where to turn when they're treated unfairly. And what we've built together, this consultancy, the change we're making, it's bigger than this one battle." I stood up, taking a deep breath. Her words were a reminder of why I had fought this battle in the first place. We had built something that was bigger than any one of us. And if we let fear or intimidation stop us now, then all of this, everything we had worked for, would have been for nothing. "I won't let them take that from us, Sarah," I said, my voice firm with determination. "No matter what they throw at us, we're not backing down. We've already come so far, I've already come so far. And I'm not going to let them win." She smiled at me, her eyes soft and proud. "I know, and I'm with you. We're in this together, always." That afternoon we went to court again. The judge, who had been presiding over our case from the beginning, looked more serious than ever as he addressed both sides. The company's legal team had presented their arguments, accusing me of breaching the settlement, claiming my public statements had undermined the spirit of the agreement. They had brought in experts with carefully crafted testimonies, and painted me as a man who had violated his word. But I knew better. And so did Gabe. This wasn't about the truth. It was about them trying to erase the victory we had won. When it was our turn, I could feel the weight of the room on my shoulders. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Gabe stood up first, speaking with the clarity and precision that had guided us through this entire battle. "The defendant," Gabe said, his voice carrying, "claims that the plaintiff violated the terms of the settlement agreement. However, the plaintiff has always acted within the spirit of the agreement. He has not disclosed any confidential information. His statements have only ever addressed the fact that the company failed to live up to its promises. The truth cannot be silenced, no matter how much money or power a corporation has." I sat there listening to Gabe speak, feeling the truth in his words. This wasn't just about me. This was about what the company had done, and the damage it had caused to people like me. People who had been treated as expendable. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every employee they had mistreated, for every person who had ever felt powerless in the face of corporate greed. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my legs a little shaky, but my resolve as firm as steel. The room went silent as I addressed the judge and the lawyers. "Your Honor," I began, "I never asked for this fight. I never wanted to be here. But when a company betrays its employees, when they take people's lives and livelihoods and treat them like pawns in a game of profit, someone has to stand up. I did that. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because it was the right thing to do. And I'm not going to let them take away the truth of what happened. Not now. Not ever." I paused, letting my words settle in the room. I could feel the weight of them, heavy but truthful. I stand by everything I've said, and I will continue to fight for the people who don't have a voice, for the people who are afraid to speak out. I'm not just fighting for myself anymore. I'm fighting for all of us. I sat back down, my heart pounding in my chest.